Live.
We are live. Hey, so what's up, everyone? Good day, good morning, good afternoon, where the heck you are, whatever you're doing. I'm glad you spent some time with us today. And today we're going to talk about something that is super important to everybody, regardless of the size of your organization. We're going to talk about culture. We're going to actually talk about the catalyst of culture, how visionary leaders activate the employee experience. Today, we're going to talk to the author of the book of the same name, The Culture Catalyst, that is my friend, Ann Sullivan. So what's up, Ann? How the heck are you?
I'm great. It is a stunningly beautiful day here in Pittsburgh. The sky is there's no humidity, and I'm looking out at birds out of a beautiful
What
window.
Kind of birds you got?
Hey. Oh, cardinals are my favorite, but right now I'm looking at some goldfinches that are playing out there, and I really like them. They're beautiful this time of year.
That does sound beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, very good. So
I
gotta ask.
Not good for focusing on work, though.
No, right? Squirrel, goldfinch. Where do we go? Right. So all over the place. So yeah, totally agree. So with that though, I gotta know, like, how come culture is such a big thing for you now, Julianne?
Well, I started out with communication, collaboration, and change. And then I got more into the employee engagement field. And then that became employee experience. And then I realized if companies really wanted to succeed and thrive, they had to have a good culture on the inside, because I started to realize how much that affects a company's sales, how well they recruit people, how long they retain people, how productive people are. And then, of course, there's lots of research that backs that up. So it just became, geez, if you want to thrive, you've got to have a good internal culture. You've got to realize that that's a lifelong process. As I say, you got to build it into the fabric of your company. So in everything you do, it's really nice to have values up on a wall, right? But if you don't, I just heard Brene Brown speak, and she used the word, you have to occupationalize them, if that's a word, but just really, like, let's say you have a value of integrity. Well, how do you use that when you recruit people? And how do you use that when you communicate with each other? And how do you use that when you go through your sales process? It has to be in everything, or it's just a word.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. I think if it isn't institutionalized and put in the fabric, it certainly doesn't work. But let's define the culture. What does culture actually mean, Julianne? Because a lot of people bandy that word about. It sounds like authenticity or transparency or some other BS buzzword that doesn't mean anything. So what does culture mean?
To me, what it means is the feeling you get when you walk in the door, whatever that door is. And that door can be a remote door also. It is to me, it's like family, right? When you go to a family dinner, do you feel like your family is having a great time together, or it's completely dysfunctional? And we all have pieces of that in our family. That to me is the culture. Do you feel safe to talk to one another? Do you feel safe to have a new idea? Do you feel safe to say something's not working and actually have an idea to fix it, and someone will listen? Culture's, like I said, what you live every day within a company, and what your customers feel too. You know how it is, right? You call a company and you have somebody answer and they're laughing and they're in a good mood, and you're like, wow, I want to do business with this company, even if I don't need anything from this company. Or you go into a restaurant and your server, right, is in a great mood. More times than not, they live in a good culture, right? As opposed to, what do you want? Unless you're in, a place where there's a place in LA where people are made to, right, insult you. But most of the time you're looking for how somebody is feeling about what they're doing. And I think that what's happened in our culture is feelings have become okay. When I started, I had a program called creating a happier workplace. And people would look at me and go, happier? Yeah. What is it? Yeah, too touchy-feely, too woo-woo. We're all going to stand around and sing Kumbaya. It was like, but now people realize that happier is good, and feeling good about where I am, feeling comfortable about where I am is good, right? So it's like vulnerability is the new sexy word for leadership, right? 5, 6, 7 years ago, vulnerable. I'm a CEO. I can't be vulnerable, right? Now it's like, oh yeah, people want to know that I'm human.
Yeah, I mean that's so interesting you say that, because that is such an interesting change in the shift, right, from the top down, the Lee Iacocca's of the 80s to now really, yeah, yep, absolutely, like Chainsaw Al Dunlap, right? Some of those folks that I read about when I was first coming up, I'm like, wow, I don't ever want to lead like that.
But it worked then.
Sure did. Sure. Well, I don't know though. Hold on. So we say that. Did it really work though? Are those companies still thriving like they were?
Yeah, no.
I
Well,
don't
look
think
what
so.
happened to Sears.
Right. Yep.
It freaks me out that 10, 20 years from now, nobody's going to know who Sears was. And they were here for over 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, we think about that, and yet we think about how little really, from a company perspective, has the top changed, has the bottom changed, or the middle changed, or did it all change, Julianne? What do you think?
Well, the top has to change or nothing else will change. Although I do teach people that, you can change your space, right? I don't think we always have to wait for whoever leadership is to get on board for us to learn how to communicate respectfully with others, right? We shouldn't always wait for someone to tell us that. We can do that on our own. However, if the top doesn't change, the whole company or organization isn't going to change, because you need the support both emotionally, physically, and monetarily to be able to do that or bring that process into everything we do. It does cost money to do some things to get it going. But honestly, in my new book, most of the suggestions made in there by the leaders that I have included, their stuff doesn't cost anything. It might cost something for a consultant to come in and kind of show you the trees in your forest, right? Or I always say it's like, if whoever has kids, or if you were ever a kid, right, your parents gave you certain information that you thought was stupid, but when Sally's or Bobby's mom said it, it was brilliant. Same way sometimes in a company, right? You can't really hear leadership say it, but you can have somebody from the outside say it, and it's like, wow, great idea.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate you say that, and I can't disagree with you that often it takes someone from the outside or a new person in an organization to help catalyze that change. But what is it about kind of being on the outside and looking in, and what is it about that actually helps catalyze that change and helps a culture be even stronger, even though it's an outside-in look?
I think that sometimes on the outside we can see and perhaps verbalize what's going on in a company in a different way so that the people within the company hear it in a different way. It all depends upon what kind of leadership you have. If you have that open dialogue and always had that, then there is that sharing of ideas that comes across really well. And there are companies that were built like that, but there's many more companies that have either had changes in leadership and they don't trust leadership, right? They're not giving even new leadership a chance. I had a CEO tell me that they had a very a CEO who was kind of in a glass castle, right? Didn't really talk to the underlings, so to speak, right? And there wasn't any communication. And as a new CEO, they went into the company cafeteria the first week they were there and sat down next to someone and said, "Hi, how's your day going?" And the other person just looked at him like this. You know, you're the CEO. Like, I can't talk to you. You know, it takes time. So sometimes somebody from the outside is that bridge for trust. It's that bridge for communication. Or like I said, if you've ever been a kid or raised kids, you say the same thing, but for whatever reason, people can hear it from someone outside the situation, especially when there's change going on. Mostly because that's been people's experience. Change is bad. It's like all put together. It's hard for them to grasp that change can be positive and good because that hasn't been their experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to help the fact that change is actually going to be a good thing instead of a bad thing. And we do that, I think, and interestingly enough, that happens by the CEO helping institutionalize that, right? The culture piece of that comes into play. So I'm curious, when you wrote this book, I mean, there's 14 different kind of case studies or stories of insight that are in here. So how did you go about picking the CEOs that you wanted to spotlight in the book, or the leaders that you want to spotlight in the book, Julianne?
Wow, that was really hard because I've now done over 50 of those interviews and I'm just itching to do volume 2 already. It was very difficult. I worked on, well, first of all, I wanted 7 women and 7 men. That was number 1. Number 2, although I've never crossed industries, I wanted to get household names and people you've never heard of. So some of it did that, and some of them just have amazing stories. Like I included Emily M. Dickens from SHRM because they represent over 100,000 people in the world in human resources. And I thought people would want to know, I mean, they truly have to set an example, right? So I thought that would be good. Gary Ridge, who's the CEO of WD-40, well, everybody's heard of WD-40, or Fast Signs International, Catherine Munson. Both of those are, they're just incredible human beings on how they have created their culture. So I wanted to include them, but then I included Jeff McManus, who's the director of landscape of the landscape services at the University of Mississippi. And I included him mainly because of my own judgment. When I was sent his information through a PR company, I went, what do I want him on for? And I wanted to get beyond that. Plus his book was called Growing Weeders into Leaders, which I thought was a great title. And he turned out to be an amazing human because he was growing people that most companies wouldn't think of growing, right? These are landscape maintenance people. Why would you want to talk to them about patience or communication? But he does. He wants to create full human beings, regardless of what you think about their job. So that's why I included him. It was difficult, but each one had a special reason. And then I tried to mix it up. So some of them are about onboarding. Some of them are about culture as a living, breathing idea. Some of them are about exit strategies. So I tried to mix that up as well. Cool.
Very, very cool. So I think that's awesome that they're all different, but I've got to know, like, you have one chapter that's called When Your Witchcraft is Your Best Strength, which, I don't know that makes tons of sense to me. So explain that, Julianne. How does that play out?
Well, where that came from was the article written about this woman, Tana Green. And I had read the article in Inc. magazine. And then, as I say, I lightly stalked her to get her on my podcast, as I do many of my guests. And the people that worked for her, because she was in a trucking industry, mainly male dominated, right? coming up with this idea of how people feel about their job, which is like, what, in trucking? So they named it, oh, there goes Tana doing her witchcraft again. So that's where that came from.
Cool. That's really cool. It's so interesting, right? When it gets named from inside, it's a lot more sticky than if we name it ourselves.
Absolutely.
So how do we, you talked about institutionalizing though. How do we institutionalize that it's even okay to talk about witchcraft in our organization, Julianne? Because that just sounds, I'm not sure.
Well, I came up with 4 attributes that I found were in common with all of the visionary leaders that I've talked to. And I think that's how you institutionalize it. So I'll tell you the 4. The first one is listening. I am a huge proponent on listening. Communication is probably my favorite idea to talk about. So all of these people are good listeners, and you've got to be a good listener to institutionalize anything. The second is that they're open to new ideas, and that means they're open to new ideas outside of themselves. This goes back to, the CEO is not the one who has all the answers all the time, right? They allow other people in the company, most of the time, who are doing a job the CEO is not, right? So they know better. One of the people I have in the book is Larry Sutton. He's a great guy. And his thing is, when his drivers need trucks, he doesn't buy it. He lets them buy it, right? Because they know what they need. He doesn't know. He's not out there doing the driving. So open to new ideas. The third one is being a lifelong learner, not only yourself, but wanting the people in your company to be lifelong learners. So Jeff McManus, as an example, wanting his landscape staff to be lifelong learners about life, not just how to grow a plant, right? And he relates everything back to that. Or you have people like Robert Glazer, who is a constant learner because he doesn't have that mentality of knowing everything just because he's the CEO of Acceleration Partners. He does it because he knows there's new ideas and he wants to be open to that. So lifelong learning. And the last one, which is becoming more and more important, is having a safe environment. Because if people can't talk or have new ideas or any of the others, then you have nothing. They're all really interrelated if you look at them. But that's the way you create your values, if you will, within your company, because you constantly talk about how can we utilize these 3 to 5 values is the key now. How can we use that when we're recruiting people? How do we use that when we're onboarding people? How do we use that every day when we talk to one another? How do we use it every day when we're working on a project and we realize that there's a possibility it might not work the way we thought it would? How do we use it when we implement a new procedure or policy and it doesn't work and we want to be open to change? How do we use it when people leave our company so they still feel loyal to us and we celebrate their progress?
Wow. Even after they leave, we still want them to be loyal. Read the
chapter on Cheryl Simmons. She has a party for people when they can get a promotion somewhere else that they don't have room for them at in her company.
Wow.
Because she cares about them. And what do? They send back great recruits. They may become your next biggest customer. Or when you do have something open for them, they may come back into the fold.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful stuff. Yeah, I read that chapter on the Magic of Maestro. That was very interesting. It's pretty unbelievable to think about. But as I think about my career, I know that some of the companies that I left, I absolutely would have either gone back to as I got promoted if there was room, or that I still to this day that I refer people to work there. So I think that's super fascinating, and that's cool that you talk to a CEO that actually uses that as a strategy instead of as an accident, which is really neat.
Well, it used to be don't burn your bridges, right? For us as employees, when we left a company, was don't burn your bridge. Now that has shifted to the employer as well.
Yeah.
Just like first impressions, right? It used to be, oh, you got to make sure you're dressed right, you speak right, you write correctly as your first impression. But now a company's website is everything. I consulted with one company and they said, we can't get good people. We can't recruit good people. And honestly, I said, in this new realm of diversity, your company has middle-aged white men on it. And that's it. If I'm a woman looking for a new I'm not going to pick your company. And I know maybe that people think that's not right, but why? That is your face. You have no people of color or women anywhere on your website. And yet you have those people in your company, and those people are in positions of leadership, but
Yeah.
you don't have them on your website.
Well, and you're not putting them in social, right? I mean, that's the other thing, right? Because a lot of people now, they've gone beyond your website and they're looking at social, they're looking at Glassdoor, they're looking at
Oh, yeah.
LinkedIn, different places. So how does culture show up on social media and on Glassdoor, Julianne?
Well, certainly on Glassdoor, if you have a better culture, you're going to rate higher. There's just no doubt about it. Even if you look at the negatives on Glassdoor, it's all about culture. It's all and mostly about communication. And I think everything starts with communication. So certainly on Glassdoor, but another company, Bamboo HR. Bamboo HR has paid vacations. So they pay people to go on vacation so they can take better vacations than they would have. And on their Twitter feed, people post where they've been. Right. So that's how it shows up for them.
Wow. That's so interesting that they would share that. But absolutely, if you're looking to attract and retain the best, demonstrating that you're doing that, not just by being an employer who says, hey, we're a great place to work. Instead, really demonstrating that great place to work. I think that's very interesting. At the same time, though, the culture of an organization also has to be transparent enough to know what they're not. I think this is one of the big things that I'm seeing as I work with the organizations as well, as I see it's okay to be who you're not. For instance, I'm working with an organization now that has had tons of acquisitions. So they're super, super fast paced, right? Things move quickly. And so people who want the status quo are not going to be attracted to work there. So I think, is that another example of how culture shows up and how we have to play to that by being more authentic, if you will?
Absolutely. In fact, the people that I have interviewed for the podcast, some of them, although I encourage all of them to put it on their website and let new recruits listen to it and let them select out, right? Saves everybody a lot more time. Oh, that's not a culture I want to be in, because some people are uncomfortable with that kind of open communication. That's not what they want to do. And I think when you look on, again, someone's website, or when you start talking to a company, and if you ask the right questions of what happens when something doesn't work in your company, how's that worked out? If you ask a question like that and somebody says, oh, everything always works out, I'm not sure I want to work there, because that's not true. That's not life, right? You and I know that only too well. Life just throws curves all the time. Look at, when Coke came out with that new Coke, it didn't work, right? And you got to go, okay, it didn't work. And I tell companies all the time, try this for 6 months a year, barring that it would ruin the reputation of your company. Even if it doesn't work, you'll find out good information. It depends. Again, are you approaching it as, we're going to try this out? Right? So many people think, oh, when we do this, it's set in stone. And no, you're working on something. And you got to let people in your company know, this is what our goal is, and this is how we're going to implement. And we are open to you telling us if this matches. We got to know, because you're the people who are doing it. And then people can try something and go, okay, it doesn't work this way. It does, and you plan town hall meetings to talk about what's working, what's not, how can we, whatever. Some companies work under, governmental rules. I worked a lot with education when I first started, and it was like, you can't change that. So find a way to work with it the best way possible. Standing around all day and going, I hate this. Well, that's not going to help your situation. I get you want to vent, but we got to move on from that. You can't just sit around and whine all day.
Absolutely. Totally agree. So how does, so Julianne, you wrote this wonderful book about the catalyst of culture. So we talked a lot about a lot of different things about culture, but if I'm thinking, I want to get started today, what's the one or two things that I can do right now that I can do inside my organization to get started on the path to having a better culture for my organization?
The number one I'm going to go back to is, how does your communication work? I'm going to give the people who are listening a great idea I put into effect in a company, and it was gigantic. I had them make up a grid on all the leadership. Afterwards, I told them they should do it for the whole company, on the leadership, and have 3 different sections: in person, email, text, or phone. There are 4. And I wanted them to rate how they like to be communicated with. And people were shocked. Wow, Mr. Smith would rather I come to his office. I never thought about going to his office because I thought he would think I was bothering him. Sally Jones never reads her emails till late in the day. I've always been getting mad at her because she doesn't answer me right away. Right? So they decided to make public, because everyone's different, and they made a grid and shared it with all the leadership and then everybody in the office. So communication, everybody communicates differently. Now, since I've done that for them, I've started to do it with my clients. How do you best like to communicate? What's the best way to get a hold of you? The other day, I had somebody tell me they want me to text them. Never would have thought that in a gazillion years. So it's a good question to ask everyone. I tell my friends, if you want me and we're friends, you have my cell number, text me, because I don't look at email most of the day. I look at it in the morning and I look at it in the afternoon. Otherwise, I'd just be there all day and wouldn't get anything else done, right? That's me. And everyone's different. So I think that's a good first step right there.
Awesome. I love that first step.
Simple, doesn't cost any money.
But it makes a big difference.
Huge results.
Yeah, I love that. Ask people how they wish to be communicated with, and then respect that and communicate in their way so you can better reach them and better connect with them.
Think about how people don't get frustrated. Like I said, Sally never answers my emails and I need an answer right now. Well, Sally doesn't read her emails till 4:00. There's a revelation. So, right, that person's carrying around resentment and the other person doesn't even know it, right? It affects all the other communication they have. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So good. So the title of your new book, Julianne, is Catalyst of Culture, How Visionary Leaders Activate the Employee Experience. Obviously, folks can get a copy on Amazon, but if you were going to send them one place where they could get more connected with you and maybe learn more about the book or about you, where would you send them?
They can go to juliannesullivan.com or they can go to catalystofculture.com. If you want to find me, you will find me. I'm everywhere. And the book just came out in Kindle this week.
Awesome. So the website, as mentioned, is Julianne Sullivan. That's JulianneSullivan.com or catalystofculture.com. Pick up a copy of the book, folks. It's great stuff. It'll help you a lot. and get to know Julianne Sullivan even more. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Julianne. You're a treat.
My pleasure, Phil. I always like spending time with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.